to our fourth public astronomy lecture. And tonight's speaker is Dr. Chris Graney from Jefferson Community and Technical College. He's actually been an adjunct here as well. He started out his career, you were at Virginia, the University of Virginia, where you were working on stars. Cooling Flows and Galaxies. So he has a PhD in astronomy. And did you come here directly? Yeah, okay, he came here afterwards to Louisville. And he's been here ever since for the last 20 years. He actually is writing books on the history of astronomy, which is something that we don't do here, but I wish we could. So actually it's very good to have the contact for the history of astronomy. And tonight, he's going to tell us about Galileo and society back a few hundred years ago. So let's welcome Dr. Chris Graney to
All right, thank you. I'm supposed to tell you that there's a guy in the back for extra credit to sign up sheet for one of the astronomy classes.
Yeah, Jim LaRoche's astronomy class. At the end, you can come and I have an attendance sheet here. So.
All right. So my name is Chris Graney, and I am a physics and astronomy professor at Jefferson Community and Technical College here in Louisville. And what a time to come here and talk about astronomy, especially the history of astronomy. Today is February the 24th of 2016. Now, I was supposed to talk in January, but U of L closed on account of snow on the day that I was supposed to be here. And so now, instead, I'm talking on the 400th anniversary of February the 24th, 1616. Now, what is special about that date? Well, on February the 24th, 1616, a committee of consultants for the Roman Inquisition assessed the heliocentric system as being foolish and absurd in philosophy. And so because of this date, I'm changing my talk just a little bit, so the focus is a little less on the strength of the science and a little more on the story. That's why I put the scratch marks through the subtitle there. Keep it the same title, but the subtitle might be appropriate. Okay. You're going to learn some new stuff. This is based on recent research, namely mine. Okay. Among other things, I got this image from the Vatican Secret Archives, previously unavailable. This is the actual image, a copy of the consultant's report from that day, February 24th, 1616. There is actually no sort of Dan Brown cloak and dagger stuff involved in getting this. How do you do it? You email the Vatican Secret Archives, you pay a small fee, and they send you a copy of a big 100 megabyte image file through Dropbox. So it's not very Hollywood. I translated the work of Francesco Ingoli, who I'm going to talk about for the first time, into English, and it was published in 2015 in the book that Jerry was talking about. And I tell you this because I think you should know that interesting work in areas like this goes on here in Louisville. Now, in my case, it's going on at Jefferson Community and Technical College, not U of L, but it's still in Louisville. And besides, I have a U of L connection. A long time ago, I adjuncted here in a couple summer classes. But right now, I am working with Delinda Bui, the professor and curator of the Rare Books Collection over in the Archives and Special Collections, right over there. Okay, and I'm working on the William Marshall Bullock Collection in mathematics and astronomy. And yeah, there is an original copy of Copernicus's De Revolutionibus right over there, okay, along with a lot of other interesting stuff, okay. So having a scholar just down the road helps out here at U of L too, even though I'm not actually at U of L. So in a week and a half, it will have been 400 years since on March the 5th, 1616, the Congregation of the Index, that's the office charged by the Pope with licensing and censoring books, issued a public decree which stated that the doctrine of Earth's motion was false and contrary to Scripture, and that to prevent the Copernican opinion from making further progress against truth, circulation of Copernicus's De Revolutionibus was to be suspended until offending material could be edited out of it. So, why did the Inquisition consultants state that heliocentrism was scientifically untenable, that is, foolish and absurd in philosophy? And why did the Congregation of the Index call heliocentrism false? Okay, but what were those churchmen thinking anyway? Right. Well, according to Galileo, they were thinking about the arguments of Francesco Ingoli. Okay. Now, and so this is all the same image. That's a translation of sort of the central piece of it, and then this is sort of just putting it in short terms. Heliocentrism is scientifically untenable, and since it contradicts the literal sense of Scripture, it is theologically heretical. So, according to Galileo, what were they thinking? They were thinking of the arguments of Francesco Ingoli. Before we get to Ingoli, let's see how all this got started. It was started in 1608 by the invention of the telescope. After all, De Revolutionibus had been published in 1543. 7 decades had passed with no committees and no decrees. But the telescope and the discoveries Galileo made using it, like the phases of Venus that demonstrated that Venus must circle the sun, had made astronomy into something that was on the minds of people who probably would not have had astronomy on their minds otherwise. Okay, some such people were the powerful de Medici family of Tuscany. Although this picture is actually this is a painting of Galileo showing the telescope to bigwigs in Venice, not in Florence. So, in December of 1616, Father Benedetto Castelli, a mathematics professor and one of Galileo's friends and followers, had breakfast with the de Medicis. Grand Duke Cosimo II de' Medici, who was the ruler of Tuscany, asked Castelli if he had a telescope. So Cosimo's on the right, Castelli's in the middle there. Castelli said that he did, and that in fact the night before he had been observing Jupiter with its Medicean planets, the moons of Jupiter, as Galileo named them. The mother of the Grand Duke, Her Most Serene Ladyship, Christina of Lorraine, she's on the left there, remarked apparently to herself that the Medicean planets had better be real and not an artifact of the telescope. The Grand Duke asked another professor who was at the breakfast, Cosimo Boscaglia, about this. And Boscaglia answered that they were real, the moons were real, as were all of Galileo's discoveries. However, Boscaglia made the point to her ladyship that the earth did not move, and that the Bible stood contrary to the idea of its motion. So Boscaglia says everything that Galileo discovered is real, but the earth doesn't move. After breakfast, the de Medicis summoned Castelli back, and Her Most Serene Ladyship, Christina, ended up arguing against Castelli, citing the Bible against any motion of the earth. Castelli, who felt that her ladyship was challenging him largely to hear what he had to say, stood his ground despite being seriously intimidated by arguing among the rich and the powerful. The Grand Duke and his wife sided with Castelli, the younger de Medici generations against the older de Medicis. On December the 14th of 1613, Castelli wrote a letter to Galileo about all of this. And we have that letter, that's where that information came from. My description comes right from Castelli's letter. Galileo responded to him on the 21st of December 1613, congratulating him. What greater fortune can you wish, wrote Galileo, than to see their highnesses themselves, enjoying discussing with you, putting forth doubts, listening to your solution, and finally remaining satisfied with your answers. No doubt he was hoping to get a research grant. Okay. So then Galileo offered a rebuttal to Her Most Serene Ladyship's biblical objection to Earth's motion. Holy Scripture can never lie or err, Galileo wrote. Nevertheless, its interpreters and expositors can sometimes err in various ways, such as by limiting themselves to the literal meaning of the words. Then, he said, one would have to attribute to God things like regret, hate, and ignorance of future things. Galileo may have been thinking of passages such as Genesis 6, 5 through 7, or Malachi 1, 3. Scripture is written to accommodate the understanding of common people, he said, so it would be imprudent, quote, to oblige scriptural passages to have to maintain the truth of any physical conclusions whose contrary could ever be proved by us. The letter became popular among Galileo's followers and was copied and circulated. By February of 1615, a complaint had been filed with the Inquisition regarding the letter. However, a consultant for the Inquisition found that, except for some bad-sounding choices of words, there was nothing questionable in the letter. Galileo's name was cleared, but the Inquisition decided to ask its consultants for an opinion on the Copernican system, and thus the events of February the 24th and March the 5th of 1616. Now we return back to Francesco Ingoli. The Inquisition had... Let's see, make sure I haven't left out any slides. Yeah, I forgot those guys. Well, that wouldn't be a bad idea.
So, you're right. This is not my home court. So.
Not bad. If it's not easy, don't worry about it. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. So go back to, now we return back to Ingoli. The Inquisition had issued, they issued no formal action, no formal condemnation of the Copernican system. The consultant's assessment, the document that I showed, was filed away. That's a whole other interesting story. Okay. The March 5th public decree by the Congregation of the Index is what Galileo knew about. That was the public action. In a 1624 letter to Ingoli, Galileo suggested that behind that decree was an essay that Ingoli wrote to Galileo 2 months prior to the decree. Quote, the arguments you, this is Galileo to Ingoli, the arguments you advanced were not lightly regarded by persons of authority who may have spurred the rejection of the Copernican opinion by the Congregation of the Index, he wrote. He noted that Ingoli's essay had circulated widely, and he wanted to make sure that no one thought, quote, that the rejection of Copernicus's opinion was based on a belief that you were right, and that Ingoli was right. The historian Maurice Finocchiaro, one of the major historians on Galileo and the Galileo affair, said, I think at the University of Nevada, has written that Ingoli, a prominent Monsignor who would later be in charge of Bowdlerizing the De Revolutionibus for the Congregation of the Index, quote, had probably been commissioned by the Inquisition to write an expert opinion on the heliocentrism controversy. Ingoli's essay, says Finocchiaro, had likely, quote, provided the chief direct basis for the recommendation by its committee of consultants that Copernicanism was philosophically untenable and theologically heretical. So, Ingoli's essay, this is the essay that Finocchiaro says is the basis for the rejection of the Copernican system, and that Galileo also says that Galileo thinks that this essay is the basis of the rejection. Okay, so what's in the essay?